Coming up this weekend, we have Brazil's Danilo Marques, one of the biggest light heavyweights you're going to find in this division, welcoming another one of Brazil's biggest light heavyweights that you're going to find in Jailton Almeida. Now, if you go and look for tape on Almeida, you're going to find him by Jailton Almeida, you're going to find him by Malhadinho, you're also going to find him by Jailton Jr. So you're going to find three different guys. It's very difficult, and there's a lot of Facebook tape that you're going to have to watch if you're looking for it, but it is out there. And for Almeida, he's one of those guys that had very good experience coming into Dana White's Contender Series. He fought a couple of UFC veterans, one of which, an Alcantara, so that was a lot of fun, and submitted him, by the way. But he is one of the more interesting prospects that I've seen coming into the UFC in the last little bit. And we've had a lot of prospects coming in over the age of 30 or thereabouts. I mean, even on this card, Chidi Njokuani did not need Dana White's Contender Series, but it's probably a way to kind of get that wage in a little bit cheaper for the UFC, which is a little bit of a joke, but more of a dig at the promotion. You've got Bondar coming in at 29, you've got Almeida at 30, and you've got Tresean Gore making his debut. He is 27, so a very polished fighter. Now, coming back a couple of weeks ago, you had Simon Oliveira, who was 30. You had a couple of different guys making that debut over 30, losing their debuts as well. But they didn't have the skills of Jailton Almeida, because this guy calls himself the Brazilian Khabib. And when I watch him fight, I think, yeah, but you're a better striker. So that's what makes this very interesting. I mean, for Almeida, he goes out there and has lasers when he's striking forwards. He kind of does a little bit of an edge spear into his takedowns, but whether it's a body lock or by this odd double leg that he does, he gets guys down fast, and once he gets them down, he's wrapping their legs. I'll throw the picture up there right now. Wraps their legs, go to push for position, gets that rear naked, gets whatever he wants, and it is a lot of getting guys down, keeping them down, and finishing the fights very quickly. And that's why when I look at this fight, Almeida, one of the more athletically gifted fighters that we have on this entire card, taking on Danilo Marques, who, yes, this fight, was it supposed to first happen in February? No, this is a fight that was booked late in, November or thereabouts. The fight fell out. You go over to Danilo Marquez's Instagram. He had a great big, wrap on his elbow. That seemed to be the reason. So out due to injury. But he's been in the gym, he's been training, he's a guy that spent time at Damian Maia's gym down in Brazil before moving to the States, working at a King's MMA, and you see over on the Instagram, him on his pedal bike with Shogun Rua, the boys just having a good time at the beach. But when you look at Danilo Marques, he was one of those guys coming into the UFC that I had absolutely zero faith in. And all of a sudden, he's 2-1 in the UFC, and he almost beat Kennedy Njokuani in his last fight until his cardio fell off a cliff. So maybe he should have spent more time on the pedal bike. But he has for this fight, Matt. When I'm looking at this one, Almeida is a super, super uber prospect who trains with Carlos Felipe. Yikes, you saw the sussy right now. But coming out of Salvador, where I have a hard time getting a read on some of these guys. I mean, I really do, because he's fought at welterweight in the past.
Wasn't there a guy 2 weeks ago who you were like, he's a wrestler from Ecuador, it's a big deal? If you don't know about a guy from Brazil, he's probably going to be good. That's all I'm saying.
No, that much is true, but I don't like to make the generalizations. But when I look
at said Ecuadorians were good at wrestling.
When I look at Almeida, he spent time fighting at welterweight. He's also fought at heavyweight. And when he's fought at heavyweight, he kind of said, in some of the interviews, even before Dana White's Contender Series, he did one with Guilherme Cruz of MMA Fighting, where he said, yeah, I'd probably like to just come into the UFC and fight at heavyweight. Light heavyweight be cool, but I could fight at heavyweight and be up there with my teammate Carlos Felipe. So, again, one of the bigger guys in this division. He has some of the most callous knees I've ever seen coming into the UFC. He works the mat. But in a fight like this, Matt, both of these guys very adept with their jiu-jitsu. I think we're going to get a fun fight.
I do too, but I'm going to warn everybody about Almeida, because let's just be honest, you brought up a lot of the positives, but I do feel like it's important to shine a light on a few of the negatives in his game, because I don't love his striking style at all, because he's such a good grappler, and I like what you brought up about his ability to shoot in for takedowns. He is very quick at being from the longest range possible to right in on your hips in half a second. He's very good at that. But he lunges into his strikes in a very similar manner, and that does have me worried, because he leaves his chin very high up in the air when he does throw those strikes in combination, and he does something that normally I look at as a massive positive, but with him I worry a little bit. While he's striking, he will switch stances, but it's not really like he's doing it on purpose. It's just his way of walking forward, because his feet will just move and his arms will follow, and that's good. He is huge. He is this super athlete. And when he does hit you with strikes, people go down because he is so athletic, but the technique behind it isn't all that great. And at 205, let's say he did fight a guy like Yuri Prohashka, and I know I keep on going to the top of the division, but even Nikita Krylov, for instance, who can land some straight shots down the middle and grapple a little bit, he might give him trouble. I think this is a great sort of launching point for Almeida, though, because if he is the guy who we sort of set up earlier on, and I think there's a world out there where he could get into the top 15, I really do, because if you take the best version of his submission game, which is very, very physically strong, but also there is some finesse to it. Like, Charles Oliveira is always who I use as an example for a guy who doesn't look like he uses any physical strength to get his submissions. Like, he's never muscling guys' arms at a position and then cranking things. It's all very by the book. With Almeida, he's so physically strong, but he does have the technique behind it that I do like him against most guys on the mat. But like you said, that's where this fight becomes very interesting. And I do think we are primarily going to get a grappling match between these guys. And for me, it'll be interesting to see how Almeida fares in a extended grappling match against Marquez. Because like you said, Marquez looked great in his last matchup until he didn't. And once the cardio fell off, he wasn't a great fighter once he was tired. Like, Draymond Green had this quote last week where Steve Kerr told him that he's like, you're one of the worst meaningless basketball game players I've ever seen. Like, if things don't matter, you're just really, really bad. With Marquez, some guys, when they're tired, they can still look okay and they can still pull off some techniques. With Marquez, he does just go into survival mode the second his cardio fails him.
And for Marquez, I opened up the video saying I did not have a read on this guy coming into the UFC because he took on some of the worst competition I've ever seen. He came into the UFC not off a contender series. He came off a win in 2018, debuted in September of 2020. So from February 2018, September 2020, that's a really long layoff. He beat a guy that was 5-4-1. Before that, he beat a guy that was 0-16. Like, you can understand why I didn't think Danilo Marques was going to be very good in the UFC. Beat Titus Ibrahimov, who was not very good in the UFC, and then he went out there and he submitted Slow Mike Rodriguez, who is not good on the ground. He can strike, but he is not
He did look good in that fight, to be fair.
Yeah, so
you're right, though.
When I look at this, I mean, again, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt from Danilo Marques. You also have that from Almeida. Almeida with a little bit of boxing experience. They said on the broadcast on Dana White's Contender Series that Almeida was supposed to be in the UFC beforehand, but there were visa issues. You go and look, I never saw any fights booked and never heard a conversation about that. Researched it extensively, could not find a definitive answer, so I don't know how much stock I put into that. But at least the UFC had eyes on Almeida, if it tells me anything. So I do look at this one. Again, he had that win over, it was Ildemar Alcantara. Ednaldo Oliveira was another one that he had, a guy who had a couple fights in the UFC, albeit he lost both of those fights. I just want to say this about Almeida. Again, he wins his last fight on Contender Series, submits the smaller fighter in Nasruddin Nasruddinov. But if you look at it, he's been in a lot of grappling tournaments lately. The wins that he has, though, again, Edvaldo de Oliveira, when he fought him, he just runs across the cage, takes him down, and then spends time just grappling on his back. His opponent was 44, almost 45 years old. Before that, he's fighting Ildemar Alcantara, again, UFC veteran. In that fight, was 2 months away from his 38th birthday.
Now, to be fair, though, Nasruddin Nasruddinov was actually pretty good. Like, he
was the favorite in that.
Exactly. So it wasn't just like this is one of those Contender Series guys who was a minus 600, beat his opponent like he was supposed to, and then, oh wow, now Dana White can sign him. Like, he did face adversity, and he did fight a really good grappler in his last matchup, and that's what gives me a little bit of confidence in this fight against Marquez, because he was able to out-grapple a very talented, judo? Nasruddinov was really good at judo. A really good judo practitioner, and he was able to out-grapple him once it hit the mat too, which is really impressive to me because it's one thing to go out there and outstrike somebody who's a natural grappler or out-grapple somebody who's a striker. When you can beat somebody by what they're supposed to be a specialist in, it really proves how good you are in that talent.
Sambo, if I'm not mistaken, for Nasruddinov, but very close. The other thing that I want to say before we get to the odds, if you look at it for Marquez, in those 3 fights, and he's lost the one to Kenny Njokuani, where again, cardio failed him. 4 of 16 on his takedown attempts against Ibrahimov, 4 of 7 against Slow Mike, and 2 of 12 against Njokuani. But the really telling thing is the control time in those fights, because 7 minutes and 16 seconds against Ibrahimov, 7 minutes 39 seconds against Slow Mike before he submitted him, 7 minutes and 42 seconds against Njokuani. He's kind of a wet blanket once he does get to the ground, and he can take his time going from position to position, trying to get his submission. And once his opponent pops back up, he just stays on them like a wet blanket, drags him back down to the mat. So this will be an interesting interesting fight because for Danilo Marques, he's one of those guys, you're 36, just turned 36, looks every bit of it. And he's a guy who is cardio not improving. However, looks like he has actually been working on it on Instagram and physically looks really, really good coming into this fight.
I doubt a 36-year-old's going to show up with better cardio, though.
You never know. This could be the
It's
one.
rare.
This could be the time. And for Almeida, again, he has all of those physical gifts and attributes that you like to see out of a guy making the debut. Polished as it gets. But again, his striking, and I have this written down with 2 lines under it and a highlighter. Car crash striking. So it scares me against a lot of guys. With Danilo Marques, he just holds his right hand cocked and pumps his jab out there, and that's pretty much the extent of his striking. So when it comes to the odds for this fight, I do look at it from Marques. He opened a plus 180 underdog. He's plus 298 right now in best fight odds. Almeida opened a minus 210, minus 395. And if we have a look at the Tapology votes, 864 total votes, 90% Almeida, 28% by submission, 55% by knockout for the 10% that are Marques, 47% by decision, 31% by submission. I'm going to say this right now. If you like Jailton Almeida, cool. I have him to win in this fight, but at a minus almost 400, not a friggin' chance in hell, because I think Danilo Marques has a great opportunity to get a submission as an underdog.
Submission might be a stretch, but I do agree that he could get the win as the underdog because he is the steadier fighter. He's the more proven guy. Let's just be honest. Like, having 3 fights in the UFC proves more to me to a certain extent than just being a really bright prospect who is getting the first opportunity in the big show. But I do like Almeida, and let's say he is the best version of what we've sort of sold in this video. He could be a very fun and promising prospect, but like, let's say he fights Alex Pereira next, or somebody of that level of striking. That's when I would worry, because the striking defense is something I am going to be concerned about until I kind of see him get hit in a fight against a high-level striker and get over that adversity. But I do like him in this matchup.
10 of Almeida's 14 wins are by first-round finish. So, again, it is one that gives me pause, and this is one of the big underdogs on this card that I don't really see it. So for me, I've got Almeida in this fight, but I would not anchor a parlay with this pick whatsoever. I'd sit back with the pop and popcorn, and I would enjoy it. So both of us going with Brazil's Jailton Almeida Malhadinho Jr. We're both going with him to get the win. We have a big-time card coming up this weekend. I mean, Hakeem Dawodu taking on Mike Trizano. You got Nick Maximov taking on Soriano. You're not going to want to miss any of it. Let's keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it.